Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Gloninger, and this is 3 Degrees. I'm with my co host Channing Dutton and David Thoreson. And in this half hour, we're going to be talking all things climate change and kicking off our new podcast. And we got a lot going on, right? We have the two stories of fire and ice happening at the same time. David, you're actually from where one of those fires is currently raging.
Yeah, I was born in Santa Ana, California. My dad was flying choppers out there at the time, working on how to pick up space capsules, involved in the space race. And so Santa Ana is a very dear place to me, place of my birth. And I'm just heartbroken about what's been happening out there and the devastation and the fact that these fires are still raging and kicking back up again. And the Santa Ana winds just won't calm down. I have heard maybe there's a chance of some rain coming up soon, but the devastation from this, another multi-billion-dollar climate storm is going to leave an impact for many years to come.
Yeah. And I know, a guy who likes to get in some trouble and have some fun is Channing Dutton. Channing, we had snow in New Orleans.
Can you imagine how crazy this is? That is, we're getting ready to kick off 3 Degrees, where it's three guys talking about the future, that we are seeing snowball fights in New Orleans. And, equally crazy, and Chris, this is your power alley, but, what's so shocking is that Houston, Texas has more accumulated snow than Des Moines, Iowa has had so far this year. And we are in a crazy time where things are getting crazier. And as David just touched on, even as we are kicking off the first comments of 3 Degrees, the new fire called the Hughes Fire is already forcing evacuations in Los Angeles. We are in a world of hurt, and I think what we're going to do is bring the truth about the future. We know what's happened in the past, and we're not going to dwell on it. We're going to look forward in this podcast.
And Jenny, you mentioned some of those areas seeing more snow than areas to the north. So Lafayette, Louisiana, 11.5 inches of snow. That is more than Des Moines at 4.5 inches for the season, 6.3 inches in Chicago for the season, 7.4 Milwaukee, 10.7 to Detroit, Minneapolis at 8.7, and Anchorage, Alaska, 3.8 inches so far this season. So parts of Louisiana seeing more snow than all of those communities that are used to snow. David, you've spent a lot of time in the Arctic.
Yeah, I have spent a lot of time in the Arctic, and let's face it, things are heating up there too. We've lost 50% of our northern polar ice cap in essentially the last 3 decades. Everything's down. We have 1.1 to 2% of the old ice left in the entire north polar ice cap, and you have fires now raging up in the Arctic Circle, whether it's in Siberia or in the northern slope of Alaska. They have the 7 degree Fahrenheit temperature increase in the last decade in Arctic Alaska. So everything's happening all at once with climate. We had a record amount of multi-billion-dollar disasters in 2023, $28 billion storms. We had 27 of those storms in 2024, and those numbers are still adding up as they keep trying to repair Asheville, North Carolina, and the Gulf Coast states that were hit by major hurricanes. And these are in the multiple tens of billions of dollars. And I was in a climate storm up in the Arctic. They aren't naming hurricanes up there yet, but I guarantee the remnants of the cyclone that I was in, Merbach, was one of the most dangerous storms that I've ever seen in my life. And it was just done by Ian in Florida at the time a few years ago. So the storms are happening, rapidly intensifying, as we know, with the warmer oceans and seas, and it's just a problem everywhere.
It really is. And, we talk about the Arctic, and everyone's focused on the cold and the snow down in the Gulf Coast, the Gulf of Mexico, not the Gulf of America, of course. And if you look at what's happening up to the north, I mean, that's an even bigger story. A place, again, as you mentioned, David, you've spent a lot of your time. And if you look at this attribution science, you can tell how much of a certain weather event is caused by or made worse by climate change. The Northwest Territories, the heat that they're seeing up there, anywhere from 2 to 5 times more likely because of climate change right now. I mean, this is an area that doesn't see any daylight this time of year, yet they're setting record high temperatures. And if that doesn't set off alarm bells, I really don't know what will, or it's disheartening and depressing, the fact that this doesn't rile up enough support. But so why are we doing this? Channing said we're going to be telling the truth. We're going to be leading with the facts. And, it all starts with climate action. And that's how I met the two of you, was moving to Iowa and finding like-minded people that were interested in doing stuff in the climate. So Channing, what's your climate story?
Well, people who spend any time thinking about Channing, and there's not many of them, but those who do know that I'm an attorney by day. But for the last 15 years, it has been climate action, bang the drum, bring the climate message, and bring the message truthfully. What I've been doing during that time, of course, is meeting people like David and I actually met in Long Beach, California at a climate event, even though we're Iowa based. And then we had the great fortune of having Chris take a job here in the state of Iowa, where we got a chance to really learn from him and to have a real climate hero who's speaking the truth. And that's really why the three of us are together, is that we've been talking to the politicians. Here I am with Joe Biden, at a big political rally here in Des Moines. But it's one thing to speak truth to the politicians, and it's another to get them to speak truth to the viewers. And so what we're going to work with now is, and this is, I love that shot. This is David on that march that started in Long Beach. And so part of what we're doing is we are three guys who share a passion for the truth, and we understand what the stakes are. And that's why 3 Degrees is going to be a fun podcast.
I gotta jump in here. Channing, where are you looking in that picture? with Sheldon Whitehouse.
Well, I think I'm trying to do the scholarly, but probably my wife was saying, "Hey, look over here." I don't know.
There was so much media. There was so much media
again.
around and so many cameras that you didn't know which one to look at. Shane.
Oh, exactly.
All right, so David, what's your climate story? I mean, you are an Iowa guy turned seafaring explorer.
I grew up in really in Lake Okoboji area in northwest Iowa, and they have a very advanced water quality community there. And so that was kind of my roots, with a background in the water quality and working as a conservation oriented photographer and writer, and also a sailor on the waters. And I combined my passions for sailing and photography and thinking about sailing around the world, and kind of followed my dream to the ocean. And so in the early 90s, I had the opportunity to sail down to Antarctica. This picture's in Antarctica, actually. We had 3 or 4 inches of snow on the boat, which is more than there is in the state of Iowa right now. And I really got a feel for the polar environment, and working with some scientists down at Palmer Station, our U.S. scientific base, learning about the animals down there being affected in the Antarctic Peninsula. And then amid sailing through the Northwest Passage on and around the Americas expedition I did with scientists and ocean and climate activists, really studying on a NOAA weather ship, taking a look at what was going on in the Arctic and in the oceans around the world in both hemispheres. And it was really during these times of going through the Northwest Passage and seeing the Northwest Passage trade route really kind of opening up for the first time in history that I knew that I had become an eyewitness to a changing climate, and it was happening really fast. That if this kid from Iowa could grow up and sail through the Northwest Passage, that something had changed up there. So I came back with a story. I got invited to speak at the first ever World Science Fest 2008. And quite frankly, I've been telling this story ever since, of our changing Arctic region, how the polar ice cap is diminishing, and how what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. the changing weather systems. Chris, you can comment on this further about what's happening with the circumpolar winds at both poles, and now the jet stream is wobbling in the north, polar vortex leaking cold air down in the North American continent, and our weather patterns, just as climate scientist Catherine Hayhoe says, we have weather weirding. Things are happening where it's snowing on the Gulf Coast with blizzard warnings, and we have record Santa Ana winds with fires going on in California that we can't even begin to control. So it's quite a journey that I've been on, and I just know that it's happening. I've seen the truth. I've been into it, and I'm just alarmed that we just have to take action and do something. And that's why I hope that our voices, our guests on this program can really help make a difference and bring some excitement about the issue to get more people active.
You know, and many of you who might be interested in our 3 Degree podcast, you don't have to look very hard to understand who Chris Gloninger is. But if you want, Google Chris Gloninger and New York Times, because when we talk about people who've been telling the truth and people who are on the cutting edge, Chris's story is one of the dynamic stories in the entire country about the urgency with which people with knowledge need to communicate that knowledge. And Chris has been walking that walk, and he especially walked it here in Iowa, and he was dynamic. Chris, give us a little background on kind of who you are and how you ended up in the New York Times.
I mean, first, I want everyone to know how the relationship started. And Channing, what was that tweet you sent me?
You mean in the very beginning?
Yeah, before I even was on air.
Well, I can't remember. You may remember the exact words, but I think it was, I was expressing skepticism that they really had hired a guy like you to come to Iowa to speak the climate truth. And I assumed you were just like some rat mole for Exxon, who was going to get on the air and do what our local weather people do. Boy, was I wrong.
Yeah, and it was this coverage. I'll play you a 2-second clip of what I did that kind of got me on the radar of the news director out in Iowa. I worked in Boston. I really had my aha moment there when I was covering climate day to day, and I started the country's first weekly series on climate change. So while I was in Iowa, I was chief meteorologist, didn't get out in the field a lot. But when I was in Boston, I was out in the field.
This is a parking lot off Auburn Avenue in Hampton, New Hampshire. You can actually see the roadway is flooded. It's sunny out. There's hardly any wind, and there isn't a coastal storm anywhere near here. And this whole area is flooded. And you can come back around these bungalows and you can see that house is practically surrounded by water. What's causing it? It's a combination of rising sea level and astronomically high tide. According to the assessment,
and I didn't get chased out of town for that, but yeah, I mean, I wanted to do something and make a difference. I know that sounds cheesy, but that was the goal of my going out there. I knew agriculture was a big part of the economy there. I knew what happened to the fishing industry where I live, with warm ocean waters causing fish to migrate and essentially just destroying, pulverizing the fishing industry on Eastern Long Island. So I wanted to kind of be that voice, that warning for people to understand that climate change is here. It's not a future issue. I mean, as Channing mentioned, if you Google my story, I ended up getting a death threat for covering climate change in Iowa. I didn't run away. I just doubled down on my efforts and have done even more when it comes to climate change in my professional life and personal life too. You know, we do our part by doing things that are green and environmentally friendly anytime we can, my wife and I. So that is my story. But you know what? I mean, what are you guys most excited about launching